Yeah. Okay. Early last month, it was revealed that Fox was in talks to revive King of the Hill. And ever since I heard about that, I just haven't been able to stop thinking about it. And not in the good ways. King of the Hill is one of the greatest American cartoons of all time. Yes, I know what I am saying by saying that. And yes, I will fight you. Apparently this is serious. They've been in talks with the original showrunners. And the original voice actor for Bobby Hill has even said that she'd be interested in reprising her role. There is a very good chance that this is actually happening. And while I am not opposed to a revival of King of the Hill in general, there are a few things that I absolutely do not want to see from the series. And I just felt like I should probably talk about them. But first, let's talk a little bit about what made King of the Hill so special to me. Why I consider it to be such a good show. Like any animation, it obviously has pitfalls. Episodes that aren't quite as good. But there is a high enough percentage of good episodes versus bad ones that King of the Hill is up there with the likes of Gravity Falls and Over the Garden Wall as one of the few American cartoons that I would really like to own in their entirety. King of the Hill was one of those grown-up cartoons with adult situations. It sort of followed in the vein of something like The Simpsons, for example, but it never fell into the same pitfalls. And it certainly isn't an essential carbon copy the way that something like Family Guy is. It deals with a Texas family in a suburban environment, a father who is very traditional and believes in very traditional things. He's a very conservative character. He believes in traditional masculinity and traditional gender roles. Shows a lot of loyalty to his wife, to his family, and to his job. This character is Hank Hill, and the show is the story of him, his family, and his friends. Every character in this show is so richly different from every other character. No one feels like they could be taken out and replaced with someone else. And the writing manages to portray Hank Hill as someone who is both wise and slow to change, which is a very interesting combination. He's also very morally straight-laced. He'll do the right thing, even if he's not entirely sure why it's the right thing some of the time. And though he is a very morally black and white person, he will deal in moral grays if he has to. The show is very slice of life, and it doesn't have any of the weird, out there, almost supernatural elements that something like The Simpsons or Family Guy has. So you might not think there's a lot of room for drama, but there absolutely is. This show, which is a comedy, is written more like a television drama than it is an animated family sitcom. There are characters in this show that I absolutely detest, and yet with the exception of a few episodes which feature them prominently, I can watch every episode of this show without issue because the show overall is that good. The few characters that I don't like, I'm not supposed to like them, and that's good. It's a good thing that they are written so that I am not supposed to like them, and I still like watching the show despite that. That's enough of me gushing about the show. Let's talk about the few things that I would like to and would like to not see in this reboot. I don't have a set number in mind, I just have a few ideas floating around, so this might not seem like a very cohesive list. But that's kind of by design. Jumping right into it, I want to see more Bobby Hill. I know a lot of people who watched this show had a lot of issues with Bobby, thought he was a very annoying character. And I agree. Bobby as a character didn't become interesting on his own until much later into the show than most of the other characters. His entire shtick is that he isn't very typically masculine. He and his father don't see eye to eye on a lot of things because of that. And his primary arcs involved him discovering himself through childhood and adolescence. He had some friends that he interacted with, and he got to see how they dealt with the same issues. Just like every other character in the show, he and his friends aren't all that similar. They're similar in age, they have a few overlapping interests, but overall they're very different people with very different stories, and their stories are told congruently. They overlap. They're all very well written kid characters and adolescent characters, giving real insight into some of the issues that kids have to deal with growing up, growing into adolescence, and going through it. A revival of the show will give it an opportunity to actually age Bobby Hill past adolescence, which is something I'd love to see. I would love to see Bobby's relationship with his friends develop into young adulthood. I would love to see his relationship with his father develop past the end of the series. He may not be a great character on his own, but his interactions with other characters are some of the most meaningful in American animation ever. The rest of the things on this list are a little more negative, starting with one that's only been rumored so far. That is to say, is more of a rumor than the revival itself. And that is that the show will have, as a writer, Seth MacFarlane. Some people are treating this as if it's a fact, as if the show is revived, Seth MacFarlane will be involved in the writing, and I cannot find where that comes from. As far as I can tell, this is just a rumor that got a little bit out of control for a very short period of time about a month and a half ago. And oh boy, am I super pleased about that. Seth MacFarlane does not have a very good history of shows that have been revived. Say what you want about Family Guy, it has a lot of problems, and it always has. But it was a far superior show before it was canceled and then brought back from oblivion. The first time, I mean. Because from what I recall, it was canceled again after that, but it wasn't actually off the air at all before they renewed it again. If Seth MacFarlane really is going to write for this show, that makes me nervous. It's not that I hate the guy or anything, he seems like a perfectly nice person, but he just isn't a very good writer. His bag of jokes is kind of shallow. Let's talk about the new Fox series, The Orville, which premiered just a week ago. Seth MacFarlane is executive producer and lead actor on that show. And while I don't know if he has anything to do with writing, despite the fact that I did like the show and I did feel that it delivered on its promise to feel like 90s Star Trek, which is a big deal to me as a Star Trek fan, the humor in the show felt like the kind of lowbrow humor that you would expect from an episode of Family Guy, just without all of the family members physically and emotionally abusing each other. I'm hoping that this was just some ad-libs by Seth and that eventually they'll weed that out of the show, because some of the humor did land perfectly fine, but it says something that all of the weaknesses in the show were Seth MacFarlane and his humor, at least in my opinion. It says to me that at this point in his life, Seth MacFarlane doesn't really add anything to the shows that he works on and in fact subtracts something. Maybe things will be different for him working on something like King of the Hill. It is a very radically different show than something like Family Guy. Maybe working with the other people who made King of the Hill what it was will help to improve him as a writer and a comedian. But I just don't have enough faith in that happening to want to see him work on this project. I also don't want to see this become a reboot like they're saying it is. I want it to be a straight-up revival and continuation, if it happens at all. Rebooting the show would be a disaster, because it's already as good as it's ever going to get. You should only ever reboot something if you think you can genuinely improve upon it. Like the new movie version of It, for example. It is immensely superior to the old miniseries. The old miniseries was, in my opinion, already a decent movie, and this one improves upon it in almost every way conceivable. And I just don't see them being able to do such a reboot with something like King of the Hill. Because like I said before, while it has its low points, it is a very good show overall. Then again, I'm not even sure that I want to see a revival of the show either. The show was canceled abruptly. It came to an end very abruptly. It didn't get a proper ending, even though it was the kind of show that you would have expected to get one. And because of that, it actually already had something of a revival. I believe they were episodes that were produced, or at least had nearly finished production that just didn't air, but the fact of the matter remains that the show did get something of a revival on Adult Swim. A few episodes were aired which wrapped up the show, ended it properly, and the ending that we got between Hank and Bobby was actually very nice and touching. Considering that their relationship was the major focus of the majority of the show, that meant something. It was an appropriate end. It reminds me a lot of the ending that we got to the revived Futurama. While a lot of the episodes in the revival weren't as good as the old ones, the eventual finale was very good, and a suitable finale for the show overall. Bringing back something like Futurama at this point would be futile, because there's nothing else to say, and I'm worried that that's true for King of the Hill as well. Which brings us back to things that I'd like to see, and that's more topical stuff. King of the Hill didn't get super topical as often as some other shows. It's certainly not as topical as something like, say, South Park, for example. Even Family Guy is a little bit more topical than something like King of the Hill tends to be. Or I guess, tended to be. I think if they are going to revive the series, they need to change that. It would certainly give the show and the characters more to say if they're saying things about the world as it is now, giving commentary on how things are, but it should never take over the show. The show should still be about the characters and what they're learning and how they're developing and changing and interacting, because that's where it shines. If they're going to revive the show, this is the direction that they need to go, or else it's just going to fall flat. It's not going to feel like it's worth watching. But between this and my idea that I mentioned earlier of aging up Bobby beyond adolescence and seeing where that goes, I think it might be enough material to get a few more seasons out of it. Which brings us to the ultimate unnecessary thing that they could do. Let's start this one off with a bit of a story. Back during the very brief revival on Adult Swim, there was talk, mostly among the fandom, of the show being continued permanently on Adult Swim. People wanted to see the show continue. It had real fans who wanted to see more. But before those talks even had a chance to become something serious, one of the cast members sadly passed away. Brittany Murphy, who played Luann Platter on the show, died far too young. And the King of the Hill fandom at that point just kind of collectively said, oh well, I guess we aren't getting any more. The character of Luann started out kind of grating and annoying, a lot like Bobby, in fact, but developed into a much more important character as the show went on. She developed her own persona. She started out as almost an archetype of the dumb blonde, and by the end, she was something completely different. Yes, she still had those traits, but she didn't begin and end with them. And that's why I think that if the show is revived, she shouldn't be in it. One of the main things that made Luann such a prolific character, that gave her such staying power, allowed her to grow so much, was Brittany Murphy's performance. While I'm sure there are actors out there who could do a perfectly good job as the character, I think it would be very disrespectful to cast anyone else in the part. I don't know how they'd explain it, that Luann's just suddenly not around anymore, but I almost think that would be the best option. There are, of course, plenty of other ways that this revival could work, other than the stuff I've mentioned here. I'm just some asshole sitting at a desk in a poorly lit room, talking about stuff he doesn't really have any idea about. But as a huge fan of the show, I felt like getting my 2 cents out there. And that's it. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with, your opinion of the show overall, in the comments section down below. And, say hello to the bird that's been chirping throughout the entire video. I'll read your comment to him, and he'll hear me, because he's right outside my house. Either way, though, guys, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.